Good day, my name is Marcos De Vrigo, the leader of the group chosen the Chapter 9, the laws, policies, and programs for the Philippine woman. So, we are going to discuss to all of you the topic that we are assigned of. Laws, policies, and programs for the Philippine woman. So for the introduction, this topic is tackled the laws, policies, and programs for Philippine women. In this report, we will discover the different rights of women through the laws, policies, and the programs that designed for them. We can think that we should protect the women by following and applying their rights and by showing them a respect that they truly deserve. By our hand by hand, we can have an amazing society if we can make the women happy. So in our topic, we have four objectives, which number one, the human rights approach. Number two, international treaties for women protection. Number three, timeline notable or policies and laws for women. And number four, laws and policies for women in the Philippines. So what is the human rights approach? Our rights are fundamental human entitlement of a person because his or her existence as a person has intrinsic value and because certain entitlement are necessary for one to realize his or her humanity. That will be discussed by Charis Taligatos.
Human rights approach. The way the world is structured places certain groups at a disadvantage. These groups have particular rights that are specific to their needs, which include sexual and reproductive health care, protection against gender-based violence, and the right to non-discrimination and education in the workplace. The respect for and promotion of these rights are necessary because they help expand women's access to resources and their roles in communities, for instance. Thus, the human rights approach to women's development is essential since it can serve as a means to increasing awareness about women, their plight and particular needs. If these human rights-based development initiatives are ratified and accepted by states, they can be an effective instrument for enforcing the promotion and protection of women's rights. It is the reason why most women advance gender equality using the rights-based approach. When organizations expose violation of rights and ask their governments to rectify the situation, they often refer to internationally recognized and guaranteed rights. Laws have been passed responding to these demands for the protection of women's rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women of 1979, the Beijing Platform for Action of 1994, the Millennium Development Goals of 2000, and the Sustainable Development Goals of 2015 are among the many documents and advocating gender equality and human development. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations. Its underlying premise is to provide all people the same basic human rights, regardless of sex or gender. These rights are fundamental human entitlements of a person. First, because his or her existence as a person has intrinsic value, and second, because certain entitlements are necessary for one to realize his or her humanity. Without these rights entitlement on individuals, human growth is almost impossible. Therefore, the rights-based approach, human rights must be protected and promoted. All humans have the right to life, the right to a nationality, the right to education, the right to a livelihood. These rights, ratified by an overwhelming majority of the members of the United Nations, are fundamental to the realization of a genuine human existence. They are universal and necessary to all human beings. However, women have particular rights due to their particularities or specificities.
International treaties for women's protection. International instruments provide a context for gender mainstreaming initiative in the Philippines and serve as a basic for the basis for the assessment of initiative. the convention and the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. That will be discussed by Julissa Mansari.
International treaties for women's protection. International instruments provide a context for gender mainstreaming initiatives in the Philippines and serves as basis for the assessment of these initiatives. Because the Philippines is a signatory to these instruments, it must create programs of laws to operationalize them. The Beijing Platform for Action, the MDGs, and the CEDAW all advocate for gender equality in the national and international spheres. These instruments were identified by the Philippine Commission on Women (PCW), the government agency that promotes gender equality and women's empowerment.
So I will be going to discuss the timeline of notable policies and laws for women. On 1975 up to 1985, the United Nations Decade of Women. On 1979, the CEDAW was adopted. On 1985, General Assembly Resolution on Domestic Violence was adopted. On 1989, the Convention on the Rights of the Child (CRC) was adopted. On 1994, the International Conference on Population and Development was initiated. On 1995, the Beijing Platform. On 1999, November 25th was designated the United Nations International. On 2008, launched an unprecedented global campaign Unite to End. On 2013, member states adopted the agreed conclusions. So in 1975 up to 1985, Decade of Women this period gave attention to women's issues in the global perspective. While the initial focus of this decade was on domestic violence, other various forms of violence against women were later added such as domestic violence, trafficking, and sexual exploitation, and women detention and in armed conflict. In 1979, the CEDAW, also known as the International Bill of Rights of Women, was adopted. This is the only human rights treaty which affirms the reproductive rights of women and targets culture and traditions as influential forces shaping gender roles and family relations. So in 1985, General Assembly Resolution on Domestic Violence was adopted. In 1989, the Convention on the Rights of the Child or CRC was adopted. CRC is concerned with the protection and the dignity of children. It contains specific notes against abuse and violence including domestic abuse and child trafficking. So, in 1994, the International Conference on Population and Development was initiated upon recognition of the relationship between violence against women and reproductive health and rights from the health consequences of domestic violence and harmful practices such as female genital mutilation to women's increased risk of HIV and AIDS as a result of violence. Its program of action called upon governments to take legal and policy measures against violence on women and girls. And in 1999, November 25th was designated the United Nations International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which also marked the United Nations formally joining the 16th Days of Activism Against Gender Violence, proclaimed and commemorated by the International Women's Movement since 1991. In 2008, the United Nations Secretary General launched an unprecedented global campaign, Unite to End Violence Against Women, calling on governments, civil society, women's organizations, young people, the private sector, the media, and the entire UN system to adopt and enforce national laws that address and punish all forms of violence against women and girls. Adopt and implement multi-sectoral national action plans, strengthen data collection on the prevalence of violence against women and girls, increase public awareness and social mobilization, and address sexual violence and conflict by 2015. Lastly, in 2013, member states adopted the agreed conclusions during the 57th Commission on the Status of Women in the Prevention and Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. the Philippine government. So next, laws and policies for women in the Philippines. The current laws protecting Filipino women rights are as testament to our foremothers' determination to fight for gender equality. Women's rights are mandated by the Philippine Constitution. Laws and policies for women in the Philippines. Women's rights are mandated by the Philippine Constitution. Women play a vital role in nation building. Their inclusions in societal structures and process are key toward equality and development. Republic Act 7192 or the Women in Development and Nation Building Act stems from the portion of the Constitution. The act tasked that the then National Commission on the national government aimed to adopt gender mainstreaming to address gender issues in all aspects of life. Executive Order Number 348 created the Philippine Development Plan for Women or PDPW for the period 1989 to 1992. It was the first development plan to integrate women's interest. It listed the Philippine objective for gender mainstreaming in projects until 1992. The Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development or PPGD was later drafted to supplement the PDPW. This 30-year perspective plan from 1995 to 2025 covers the following domains: the individual, the family, as well as social, cultural, economic, political, and legal issues. The PPGD considers gender and development mainstreaming a priority concern and seek to achieve gender equality in all public programs and policies. It was created to integrate a gender responsive framework within development plans, policies, budgets, and program under. The Philippine government produced two recent publications on gender mainstreaming. These are the successors of the PDPW and PPGD, which were created more than 2 decades ago. The first is the Harmonious Gender and Development Guidelines published in 2010 by the National Economic and Development Authority or NEDA. PCW and the Official Development Assistance Gender and Development Network, the guidelines are concrete responses to the Magna Carta of Women, which also calls for the gender mainstreaming in all government programs and policies. The documents outline sector-specific implementations of the GAD perspective in gender responsive planning. And the other publication is the Women Empowerment, Development and Gender Equality or ADGE Plan 2013 to 2016 published by the PCW. It addresses previous gaps in the PDPW and PPG. So this is my reflection about this activity. So I have learned that in this activity I discover a lot of important things about our laws of our beloved country regarding on protecting women's rights and those policies and programs that can help to build a better community for us. It was a fun activity that I made. It helped me to boost my self-discovery. So, this is the summary of our reports about the laws, policies, and programs for Filipino women. So, the laws, policies, and programs for Filipino women has a big role to empower the rights of Filipino women. It explains that our rights are fundamental human entitlement of a person because his or her existence as a person has intrinsic value and because certain entitlements are necessary for one to realize his or her humanity. International instruments provide a context for general mainstreaming initiative in the Philippines and serve as a basis for the assessment of initiative. The Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Government had a step to protect the rights of women here in our country. The current laws protecting Filipino women rights are as testament to our foremothers' discrimination to to fight for the gender equality. Women's rights are mandated by the Philippines Constitution. Laws, policies, and programs for Philippine women. Members: Mike Steve Rigo, Charis Talicatos, and Jolaisa Mansari. So in 1985, General Assembly Resolution on domestic violence was adopted.